And let's move to Russia, if we could. Russia is sending troops and tanks into Syria right now to prop up a U.S. enemy, Bashar al-Assad. President Obama's incoming top general says, quote, Russia presents the greatest threat to our national security. Mr. Trump, you say you can do business with President Vladimir Putin. You say you will get along, quote, very well. What would you do right now, if you were president, to get the Russians out of Syria?
All right, so number one, they have to respect you. He has absolutely no respect for President Obama. Zero. Syria is a mess. You look at what's going on with ISIS in there. Now think of this. We're fighting ISIS. ISIS wants to fight Syria. Why are we fighting ISIS in Syria? Let them fight each other and pick up the remnants. I would talk to him. I would get along with him. I believe, and I may be wrong, in which case I'd probably have to take a different path, but I would get along with a lot of the world leaders that this country is not getting along with. We don't get along with China. We don't get along with the heads of Mexico. We don't get along with anybody. And yet at the same time, they rip us left and right. They take advantage of us economically and every other way. We get along with nobody. I will get along, I think, with Putin, and I will get along with others, and we will have a much more stable world.
So just to clarify, the only answer I heard to the question I asked is that you would reach out to Vladimir Putin and you would do what?
I believe that I will get along. We will do, between that, Ukraine, all of the other problems, we won't have the kind of problems that our country has right now with Russia and many other nations.
Senator Rubio, you've taken a very different approach to the question of Russia. You've called Vladimir Putin a, quote, gangster. Why would President Rubio's approach be more effective than President Trump's?
Well, first of all, I have an understanding of exactly what it is Russia and Putin are doing, and it's pretty straightforward. He wants to reposition Russia once again as a geopolitical force. He himself said that the destruction of the Soviet Union, the fall of the Soviet Union, was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. And now he's trying to reverse that. He's trying to destroy NATO. And this is what this is a part of. He is exploiting a vacuum that this administration has left in the Middle East. Here's what you're going to see in the next few weeks. The Russians will begin to fly combat missions in that region, not just targeting ISIS, but in order to prop up Assad. He will also then turn to other countries in the region and say, America is no longer a reliable ally, Egypt. America is no longer a reliable ally, Saudi Arabia. Begin to rely on us. What he is doing is he is trying to replace us as the single most important power broker in the Middle East, and this president is allowing it. That is what is happening in the Middle East. That's what's happening with Russia and every region.
I want to bring in Carly Fiorina. Ms. Fiorina.
Having met Vladimir Putin, if I may, having met Vladimir Putin, I wouldn't talk to him at all. We've talked way too much to him. What I would do immediately is begin rebuilding the Sixth Fleet. I would begin rebuilding the missile defense program in Poland. I would conduct regular, aggressive military exercises in the Baltic states. I'd probably send a few thousand more troops into Germany. Vladimir Putin would get the message. By the way, the reason it is so critically important that every one of us know General Soleimani's name is because Russia is in Syria right now because the head of the Quds force traveled to Russia and talked Vladimir Putin into aligning themselves with Iran and Syria to prop up Bashar al-Assad. Russia is a bad actor, but Vladimir Putin is someone we should not talk to because the only way he will stop is to sense strength and resolve on the other side, and we have all of that within our control. We could rebuild the Sixth Fleet. I will. We haven't. We could rebuild the missile defense program. We haven't. I will. We could also, to Senator Rubio's point, give the Egyptians what they've asked for, which is intelligence. We could give the Jordanians what they've asked for, bombs and materiel. We have not supplied it. I will. We could arm the Kurds. They've been asking us for 3 years. All of this is within our control.
Thank you, Ms. Fiorina. While you brought up the subject of General Soleimani of the Quds forces from Iran, the next president, no matter who he or she may be, will inherit President Obama's Iran deal. Senator Cruz, Governor Kasich says that anyone who is promising to rip up the Iran deal on day one, as you have promised to do, is, quote, inexperienced and, quote, playing to a crowd. Respond to Governor Kasich, please.
Well, let me tell you, Jake, the single biggest national security threat facing America right now is the threat of a nuclear Iran. We've seen 6.5 years of President Obama leading from behind. Weakness is provocative, and this Iranian nuclear deal is nothing short of catastrophic. This deal on its face will send over $100 billion to the Ayatollah Khamenei, making the Obama administration the world's leading financier of radical Islamic terrorism. This deal abandons 4 American hostages in Iran, and this deal will only accelerate Iran's acquiring nuclear weapons. You better believe it. If I am elected president on the very first day in office, I will rip to shreds this catastrophic Iranian nuclear deal.
Why is that not, as Governor Kasich says, playing to the crowd and an example of you being inexperienced?
Well, let's be clear when it comes to experience. What President Obama wants to do is he's run to the United Nations, and he wants to use the United Nations to bind the United States and take away our sovereignty. Well, I spent 5.5 years as the Solicitor General of Texas, the lead lawyer for the state in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And I went in front of the Supreme Court and took on the World Court in the United Nations in a case called Medellin versus Texas. And we won an historic victory, saying the World Court in the UN has no power to bind the United States, and no president of the United States, Republican or Democrat, has the authority to give away our sovereignty. And so if there's anyone up here who would be bound by this catastrophic deal with Iran, they're giving up the core responsibility of commander-in-chief. And as president, I would never do that.
Governor Kasich, did Senator Cruz just play to the crowd?
Let me just say this. First of all, I think it's a bad agreement. I would never have done it. But, you know, a lot of our problems in the world today is that we don't have the relationship with our allies. If we want to go everywhere alone, we will not have the strength as if we can rebuild our relationships with our allies. Now, this agreement, we don't know what's going to happen in 18 months. I served on the Defense Committee for 18 years. I've seen lots of issues in foreign affairs and in terms of global politics. You have to be steady. Now, if they cheat, we slap the sanctions back on. If they help Hamas and Hezbollah, we slap the sanctions back on. And if we find out that they may be developing a nuclear weapon, then the military option is on the table. We are stronger when we work with the Western civilization, our friends in Europe, and just doing it on our own, I don't think is the right policy.
Thank you, Governor Kasich. I want to go to Senator Paul.
Jacob.
I want to go to Senator Paul. Senator Paul, the White House is rolling out the red carpet next week for the president of China, President Xi. Governor Walker says that President Obama should cancel the state dinner because of China's currency manipulation and because of China's alleged cyber attacks against the United States. Is Governor Walker right?
I think this goes back to essentially what we've been saying for the last 2 or 3 questions. Carly Fiorina also said, we're not going to talk with Putin. Well, think if Reagan had said that during the Cold War. We continued to talk with the Russians throughout the Cold War, which is much more significant than where we are now. Should we continue to talk with Iran? Yes. Should we cut up the agreement immediately? That's absurd. Wouldn't you want to know if they've complied? Now, I'm going to vote against the agreement because I don't think there's significant leverage, but it doesn't mean that I would immediately not look at the agreement and cut it up without looking to see whether Iran is complying. The same goes with China. I don't think we need to be rash. I don't think we need to be reckless. And I think we need to leave lines of communication open. Often we talk about whether we should be engaged in the world or disengaged in the world. And I think this is an example of some who want to isolate us, actually, and not be engaged. We do need to be engaged with Russia. It doesn't mean we give them a free pass or China a free pass. But to be engaged means to continue to talk. We did throughout the Cold War, and it'd be a big mistake not to do it.
Governor Walker, Senator Paul seemed to suggest that canceling the state dinner would be rash and reckless.
No, two parts to that. One on China, one back for a second on Iran. When it comes to China, why would we be giving an official state visit to a country that's been involved in a massive cyber attack against the United States? That's not just a visit. That's a 21-gun salute in the South Lawn of the White House. It just doesn't make any sense. If we're ever going to send a message to them, wouldn't this be the time when they issued this sort of massive attack against us? And Jake, per the question, I was one of the first ones to call for terminating the bad deal with Iran on day one. The president came after me and said I needed to bone up. You know, the president who called ISIS the JV squad said I needed to bone up. The reality is it's a bad deal on day one, and it's a bad deal because this president has allowed Iran to go closer and closer. I'd love to play cards with this guy, because Barack Obama folds on everything with Iran. We need a leader who's going to stand up and actually show some teeth.
Governor Bush, your father was the chief diplomatic envoy to China back when Nixon opened relations to China. Is Scott Walker's approach the right one, canceling the state dinner?
No, I don't think so, but we need to be strong against China. We should use offensive tactics as it relates to cybersecurity to send a deterrent signal to China. There should be stiffer sanctions than what President Obama has proposed. There's many other tools that we have without canceling a dinner. That's not going to change anything, but we can be much stronger as it relates to that. And as it relates to Iran, it's not a strategy to tear up an agreement. A strategy would be, how do we confront Iran? And the first thing that we need to do is to reestablish our commitment to Israel, which has been tattered by this administration, and make sure that they have the most sophisticated weapons to send a signal to Iran that we have Israel's back. If we do that, it's going to create a healthier deterrent effect than anything else I can think of.
I want to turn to Governor Huckabee, who has been very patient. Somebody had to be 11th, and he is. But I do want to change the subject to the event that you had a meeting.
I would certainly love to get in on this.
Well, you can use your minute however you want, but I want to ask this question.
Waiting, and I'm going to just say this about Iran.
All right, sir, go ahead.
Because I think it is incredibly important. This is really about the survival of Western civilization. This is not just a little conflict with a Middle Eastern country that we've just now given over $100 billion to. The equivalent in U.S. terms is $5 trillion. This threatens Israel immediately. This threatens the entire Middle East, but it threatens the United States of America. And we can't treat a nuclear Iranian government as if it is just some government that would like to have some power. This is a government that for 36 years has killed Americans. They've kidnapped Americans. They've maimed Americans. They have sponsored terrorist groups, Hamas and Hezbollah. And they threaten the very essence of Western civilization. To give them this agreement that the president treats like the Magna Carta, but the Iranians treat it like it's toilet paper. And we must simply make it very clear that the next president, one of us on this stage, will absolutely not honor that agreement and will destroy it and will be tough with Iran, because otherwise we put every person in this world in a very dangerous place.
Jake,
okay.
I'd like a
We're going to turn now to Hugh Hewitt from Salem Radio Network.
Thank you, Jake. Mr. Trump, 2 years ago, President Obama drew a red line that the Syrian dictator Bashar Assad crossed. President Obama threatened to strike. He did not. His knees buckled. We now have 4 million refugees. Syria is a living hell. And he turned to the Congress for the authority to back him up. You have 3 senators to your right who said no. Do they bear responsibility for this refugee crisis? And what would you have done when Bashar Assad crossed that line?
Number one, I wouldn't have drawn the line, but once he drew it, he had no choice but to go across. They do bear some responsibility, but I think he probably didn't do it not for that reason. Somehow he just doesn't have courage. There's something missing from our president. Had he crossed the line and really gone in with force and done something to Assad, if he had gone in with tremendous force, you wouldn't have millions of people displaced all over the world.
How much responsibility, Mr. Trump, did the senators hold?
I think they had a responsibility, absolutely. I think we have 3 of them here.
Senator Rubio?
I think they had a responsibility. Yes.
Let me tell you, we have zero responsibility, because let's remember what the president said. He said the attack that he was going to conduct was going to be a pinprick. Well, the United States military was not built to conduct pinprick attacks. If the United States military is going to be engaged by a commander-in-chief, it should only be engaged in an endeavor to win. And we're not going to authorize use of force if you're not putting men and women in a position where they can win. And quite frankly, people don't trust this president as commander-in-chief because of that.
Senator Paul.
I think this gets to the point of wisdom on when we should intervene and when we shouldn't. Had we bombed Assad at the time, like President Obama wanted, like Hillary Clinton wanted, and like many Republicans wanted, I think ISIS would be in Damascus today. I think ISIS would be in charge of Syria had we bombed Assad. Sometimes both sides of a civil war are evil, and sometimes intervention makes us less safe. This is the real debate we have to have in the Middle East. Every time we've toppled a secular dictator, we've gotten chaos, the rise of radical Islam, and we're more at risk. So I think we need to think before we act and know that most interventions, if not a lot of them in the Middle East, have actually backfired on us.
Thank you, Senator Paul. I want to turn now to my colleague, Dana Bash.
Hold on a second, Jake. He asked me as well. I'd like to actually
go
get
ahead,
a chance
sir. That would be fair. You're right.
Respond to
You're right. You're the 3rd senator.
I think I'm the 1st senator. The number 1 test for use of military force should be the vital national security interest of the United States. The reason why I opposed President Obama bombing Syria is because he couldn't answer the question, what do you do if chemical weapons end up in the hands of radical Islamic terrorists like al-Nusra, like al-Qaeda, like ISIS? Now, I also want to respond to several of the folks up here who said, we should trust this Iranian deal and see if the Iranians will comply. Anyone who's paying attention to what Khamenei says knows that they will not comply. There's a reason Khamenei refers to Israel as the little Satan, and America is the great Satan. In the middle of negotiating this treaty, Khamenei led the assembled masses in chanting death to America. I'm reminded of a great editorial cartoon. It shows the Ayatollah Khamenei saying death to all Americans. And then it shows John Kerry coming back saying, can we meet you halfway? We need a commander-in-chief who will stand up and protect this country. And I'll tell you, I can't wait to stand on that debate stage with Hillary Clinton and to make abundantly clear, if you vote for Hillary, you are voting for the Ayatollah Khamenei to possess a nuclear weapon. And if you elect me as president, under no circumstances will a theocratic Ayatollah who chants death to America ever be allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon.
Thank you, Senator Cruz.
Jake,
we're going to go to Dana Bash.
No. I want to say something about what the senator just said.
And then
let me suggest to you, we believe that we operate better in the world when our allies work with us. President Bush did it in the Gulf War. We work better when we are unified. Secondly, nobody's trusting Iran. They violate the deal. We put on the sanctions, and we have the high moral ground to talk to our allies in Europe, to get them to go with us. If they don't go with us, we slap the sanctions on anyway. If they fund these radical groups that threaten Israel and all of the West, then we should rip up the deal and put the sanctions back on. And let me make it clear. If we think they're getting close to developing a nuclear weapon and we get that information, you better believe that I would do everything in my power as the commander-in-chief to stop them having a nuclear weapon. We can have it, and we can have our allies, and we can be strong as a country, and we can project across this globe with unity, not just doing it alone. That is not what gets us where we want to get as a nation.
Senator Cruz.
Jake, there is no more important topic in 2016 than this topic right here. And I've listened to several folks saying, well, gosh, if they cheat, we'll act. We won't know. Under this agreement, there are several facilities in Iran they designate as military facilities that are off limit altogether. Beyond that, the other facilities, we give them 24 days notice before inspecting them. That is designed to allow them to hide the evidence. And most astonishingly, this agreement trusts the Iranians to inspect themselves. That makes no sense whatsoever. And let me note, President Obama is violating federal law by not handing over the side deals, and we ought to see the United States Congress stand up together and say, hand over this treaty and protect this country.
Thank you, Senator.
Let's force him to do it.
Dana, I'd like to link these two issues, both of which are incredibly important. Iran and Planned Parenthood. One has something to do with the defense of the security of this nation. The other has something to do with the defense of the character of this nation. You have not heard a plan about Iran from any politician up here. Here's my plan. On day one in the Oval Office, I will make 2 phone calls. The first to my good friend Bibi Netanyahu to reassure him we will stand with the state of Israel. The second to the Supreme Leader to tell him that unless and until he opens every military and every nuclear facility to real anytime, anywhere inspections by our people, not his, we, the United States of America, will make it as difficult as possible to move money around the global financial system. We can do that. We don't need anyone's cooperation to do it. And every ally and every adversary we have in this world will know that the United States of America is back in the leadership business, which is how we must stand with our allies. As regards Planned Parenthood, anyone who has watched this videotape, I dare Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama to watch these tapes. Watch a fully formed fetus on the table, its heart beating, its legs kicking, while someone says we have to keep it alive to harvest its brain. This is about the character of our nation. And if we will not stand up and force President Obama to veto this bill, shame on us.
Mr. Trump, Senator Rubio said it was, quote, very concerning to him that in a recent interview you didn't seem to know the details about some of the enemies the U.S. faces. Rubio said if you don't know the answers to those questions, you will not be able to serve as commander-in-chief. Please respond to Senator Rubio.
Well, I heard Hewitt, a nice man. He apologized because he actually said that we had a misunderstanding, and he said today that Donald Trump is maybe the best interview there is anywhere that he's ever done. Now, unless he was just saying that on CNN to be nice, but he did say that.
Oh, you're the best interview in America.
And we had a legitimate misunderstanding in terms of his pronunciation of a word, but I would say just, well, I think it was. And he actually said that. Did you say that?
And so radio makes an interesting thing.
Okay, so I will say this, though. You was giving me name after name, Arab name, and there are few people anywhere that would have known those names. I think he was reading them off a sheet. And frankly, I will have, and I told him, I will have the finest team that anybody's put together, and we will solve a lot of problems. You know, right now, they know a lot, and look at what's happening. The world is blowing up around us. We will have great teams and great people.
Senator
I hope
Rubio?
that answers your question. I mean, you are in the Senate, but I hope that answers your question.
Well, it does, but then it's the following way. This is an important question. I think if you're running for president, these are important issues, because look around the world today. There is a lunatic in North Korea with dozens of nuclear weapons and a long-range rocket that can already hit the very place in which we stand tonight. The Chinese are rapidly expanding their military. They hack into our computers. They're building artificial islands in the South China Sea, the most important shipping lane in the world. A gangster in Moscow is not just threatening Europe, he's threatening to destroy and divide NATO. You have radical jihadists in dozens of countries across multiple continents, and they even recruit Americans using social media to try to attack us here at home. And now we've got this horrible deal with Iran where a radical Shia cleric with an apocalyptic vision of the future is also guaranteed to one day possess nuclear weapons and also a long-range rocket that can hit the United States. These are extraordinarily dangerous times that we live in. And the next president of the United States better be someone that understands these issues and has good judgment about them. Because the number one issue that a president will ever confront, and the most important obligation that the federal government has, is to keep this nation safe. And today, we are not doing that. We are eviscerating our military, and we have a president that is more respectful to the Ayatollah in Iran than he is to the Prime Minister of Israel.
Mr. Trump, Senator Rubio seemed to be suggesting that you don't know information.
No, I don't think he's suggesting that at all. I mean,
Are you, Senator Rubio?
I don't think he's suggesting that.
Well, that's why we have a debate. I think that we should have a deeper debate about these issues, because there is no more important decision that a president will make.
But are you saying that you have the knowledge to be the president that Mr. Trump does not have?
Well, you should ask him questions in detail about the foreign policy issues our president will confront, because you better be able to lead our country on the first day. Not 6 months from now, not a year from now. On the first day in office, our president could very well confront a national security crisis. You can't predict it. Sometimes you cannot control it. And it is the federal government does all kinds of things it's not supposed to be doing. It regulates bathrooms. It regulates schools that belong to local communities. But the one thing that the federal government must do, the one thing that only the federal government can do, is keep us safe. And a president better be up to date on those issues on his first day in office, or on her first day in office.
Mr. Trump.
Well, you have to understand, I am not sitting in the United States Senate with, by the way, the worst voting record there is today, number one. I am not sitting in the United States Senate. I'm a businessman doing business transactions.
Okay.
I am doing business transactions. I will know more about this, and as you said, that was very acceptable. And when you listen to that whole interview, it was a great interview. You said it, I didn't.
Yeah,
well, now I did. But I will, listen, just 1 second.
Well, but he addressed
just 1 second.
I never get addressed, so when I do, I'm going to jump in.
I will know more about the problems of this world by the time I sit. And you look at what's going on in this world right now by people that supposedly know this world is a mess.
Senator Rubio, he did invoke your absentee record in the Senate.
I'm proud to serve in the United States Senate. You know, when I ran 5 years ago, the entire leadership of my party in Washington lined up against me. But I'm glad I won, and I'm glad that I ran, because this country's headed in the wrong direction. And if we keep electing the same people, nothing is going to change. And you're right, I have missed some votes, and I'll tell you why, Mr. Trump. Because in my years in the Senate, I figured out very quickly that the political establishment in Washington, D.C., in both political parties, is completely out of touch with the lives of our people. You have millions of people in this country living paycheck to paycheck, and nothing's being done about it. We are about to leave our children with $18 trillion in debt, and they're about to raise the debt limit again. We have a world that grows increasingly dangerous, and we are eviscerating our military spending and signing deals with Iran. And if this thing continues, we are going to be the first Americans to leave our children worse off than ourselves. That's why I'm missing votes, because I am leaving the Senate. I'm not running for re-election, and I'm running for president, because I know this. Unless we have the right president, we cannot make America fulfill its potential. But with the right person in office, the 21st century can be the greatest era that our nation has ever known.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. I want to turn now to Hugh Hewitt.
Thank you, Jake. I've done a lot of great interviews with all of you, but Governor Bush, I talked to you in February about the biggest elephant in a room full of elephants, which is your last name. And you told me that you would not be burdened either by your brother or your father's legacy in the Middle East. And then a week later, you rolled out your list of foreign policy advisors, and it was a lot of the band getting back together again. So on behalf of the military that is watching, okay, the active duty military that are at the end of the spear, what kind of a commander-in-chief is Jeb Bush going to be, and who are the advisors that are new to your team?
Well, first of all, Hugh, if you're looking at Republican advisors, you have to go to the last two administrations that happen to be 41 and 43. So just by definition, if you're, and many of the people here that are seeking advice from the foreign policy experts in the Republican side, they served in my dad's administration, my brother's administration. Of course that's the case. But I'm my own man. I'm going to create a strategy that's based on the simple fact that the United States needs to lead the world. The first thing that we need to do is to stop the craziness of the sequester, rebuild our military so that we don't deploy people over and over again without the necessary equipment to keep them safe, to send a signal to the world that we're serious. If we're going to lead the world, then we need to have the strongest military possible. We need to rebuild our counterintelligence and intelligence capabilities. We need to focus on the fact that the next president's going to start in 2017, not in 1990, 30 years ago, or when my brother started. The world is dramatically different. And I believe that we need to restore America's presence and leadership in the world. Name a country where our relationship is better today than it was the day that Barack Obama got elected president. Under Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, we have seen a weakness that now creates huge problems for the next president of the United States. So I'll have a team that will be following the doctrine that I set up, and it'll be peace through strength. We're sitting here in this library, which is a wonderful place to talk about this, because that's exactly what happened in the 1980s, and the world was a lot safer because of the leadership of Ronald Reagan and my
Trump.
I
I want to ask you a question, though. You've promised us great leaders, and I believe that. But Jeb Bush has laid out 20 different people that have experience around the world. There are 190 countries. You can't run the world by yourself. When are we going to get some names on your military and your foreign policy advisors?
And I'm meeting with people that are terrific people, but I have to say something because it's about judgment. I am the only person on this dais, the only person that fought very, very hard against us, and I wasn't a sitting politician, going into Iraq. Because I said going into Iraq, that was in 2003, you can check it out, I'll give you 25 different stories. In fact, a delegation was sent to my office to see me because I was so vocal about it. I'm a very militaristic person, but you have to know when to use the military. I'm the only person up here that fought against going into Iraq.
Hugh, can I make a response to that?
Just excuse me 1 second, Rand, if you don't mind, Rand. You know, you are on the list. You do have your 1%. I would like, and I think it's very important. I think it's important because it's about judgment. It's about judgment. I didn't want to go into Iraq, and I fought it because what I said to you, was you're going to destabilize the Middle East, and that's what happened.
So he's referred to me.
No,
in
the
his
first
remarks.
chance.
May I make a response?
Right after me.
Go ahead.
I'll yield the floor. What do you guys say in the Senate when you're talking and debating?
Absolutely. Go
Whatever.
ahead.
Here's the fact. When Donald Trump talks about judgment, what was his position on who would have been the best negotiator to deal with Iran? It wasn't a Republican. It was Hillary Clinton. That's what you believe. I mean, the lack of judgment and the lack of understanding about how the world works is really dangerous in this kind of time that we're saying. So is that the judgment that you bring to the table, that Hillary Clinton is a great negotiator, that she could bring about a better deal with Iran?
Your brother and your brother's administration gave us Barack Obama because it was such a disaster those last 3 months that Abraham Lincoln couldn't have been elected.
You know what? As it relates to my brother, there's one thing I know for sure. He kept us safe. I don't know if you remember, Donald. You remember the rubble? You remember the firefighter with his arms around it? He sent a clear signal that the United States would be strong and fight Islamic terrorism, and he did keep us safe.
I don't know. You feel safe right now? I don't feel so safe.
May I respond?
Well, that's because of Barack. That's because of Barack
That's
Obama.
my brother.
That's because of Barack Obama. We've had a president who called ISIS the JV Squad, Yemen a success story, Iran a place we can do business with. It's not because of George W. Bush. It's because of Barack Obama. But here on that point though, whether we're talking about national security, foreign policy, or we're talking about domestic policy.
Or the collapse of the economy.
The key issue here is talking about leadership. Now, there's a lot of great people up here, and you've heard a lot of great ideas out there. But I would ask the American people, look at who's been tested. When there were 100,000 protesters in my capital, I didn't back down. When they issued death threats against me and threats against my family, I didn't back down. When they tried to recall me, I didn't back down. And when they made me one of their #1 targets last year, I didn't back down. Give me the chance to be your president.
Thank you, Governor.
I won't back down
Senator,
on any of these issues.
Senator Paul.
The remark was made that there hadn't been anyone else on the podium opposed to the Iraq War. I've made my career as being an opponent of the Iraq War. I was opposed to the Syrian War. I was opposed to arming people who are our enemies. Iran is now stronger because Hussein is gone. Hussein was the great bulwark and counterbalance to the Iranians. So when we complain about the Iranians, you need to remember that the Iraq War made it worse. Originally, Governor Bush was asked, was the Iraq War a mistake? And he said, no, we'd do it again. We have to learn sometimes the interventions backfire. The Iraq War backfired and did not help us. We're still paying the repercussions of a bad decision. We have to make the decision now in Syria. Should we topple Assad? Many up here wanted to topple Assad, and it's like, I said no, because if you do, ISIS will now be in charge of Syria.
I understand that Governor Bush's name has been invoked, and then we can go to you, Senator Rubio.
Here's the lessons of history. When we pull back, voids are created. We left Iraq. We should have had a forces agreement to stay there with a small force. And instead of that, we politically and militarily pulled back, and now we have the creation of ISIS. 36 days ago, in this very library, I gave a speech with a comprehensive strategy how to take out ISIS. And it requires American leadership and engagement. We don't have to be the world's policeman, but we certainly have to be the world's leader. We need to make sure that the world knows that we're serious, that we're engaged, that we're not going to pull back, that our word matters. And if we do that, we can create a force that will take out ISIS both in Iraq and in Syria, which will take a lot longer time now because of what President Obama's done by pulling back.
I want to go even deeper, and I want to go even deeper in that direction, because I think the belief that somehow by retreating America makes the world safer has been disproven every single time it's ever been tried. Syria is a perfect example of it. The uprising in Syria was not started by the United States. It was started by the Syrian people. And I warned at the time, this was 3.5 years ago, I openly and repeatedly warned that if we did not find moderate elements on the ground that we could equip and arm, that void would be filled by radical jihadists. Well, the president didn't listen. The administration didn't follow through. And that's exactly what happened. That is why ISIS grew. That is why ISIS then came over the border from Syria and back into Iraq. What is happening in that region is the direct consequence of the inability to lead and of disengagement. And the more we disengage, the more airplanes from Moscow you're going to see flying out of Damascus and out of Syria.
Thank you,
as
Senator.
you asked earlier today.
Dr. Carson.
I haven't had an opportunity to weigh in on foreign policy, and I just want to mention that when the issue occurred in 2003, I suggested to President Bush that he not go to war. Okay, so I just want that on the record. And, you know, a lot of people are very much against us getting involved right now with global jihadism. And they refer back to our invasion of Iraq, and they seem to think that that was what caused it. What caused it was withdrawing from there and creating a vacuum, which allowed this terrible situation to occur. But it's very different from what's going on today. We're talking about global jihadists who actually want to destroy us. They are an existential threat to our nation. And we have to be mature enough to recognize that our children will have no future if we put our heads in the sands. We have to recognize we have two choices. We either allow them to continue to progress and appear to be the winners, or we use every resource available to us to destroy them.
It's interesting that you say that, because I want to ask Governor Christie about something else that you have said. Governor Christie, we just marked the 14th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. Now, Dr. Carson has said that if he had been president at the time, the United States would not have gone to war in Afghanistan. What does that say to you about how Dr. Carson would respond as president if America were attacked again?
Well, Jake, I was named U.S. Attorney by President Bush on September 10th, 2001. And that next day, my wife, Mary Pat, did what she did every day. She traveled through the World Trade Center and went to her office 2 blocks from the World Trade Center. And after those planes hit for 5.5 hours, after that, I couldn't reach her, didn't know whether she was dead or alive, and we had 3 children at the time, 8, 5, and 1. And I had to confront what so many thousands of others in my region had to confront. The idea that I might become a single parent, the idea that my life and my children's life might be changed forever. We lost friends that day. We went to the funerals. And I will tell you that what those people wanted and what they deserved was for America to answer back against what had been done to them. And I support what President Bush did at that time, going into Afghanistan, hunting al-Qaeda and its leaders, getting its sanctuary out of place, and making it as difficult around the world for them to move people and money. And then he went to prosecutors like us, and he said, never again. Don't prosecute these people after the crime is committed. Intervene before the crime happens. I absolutely believe that what the president did at the time was right, and I am proud to have been one of the people on the stage who was part of making sure that what Governor Bush said before was the truth. America was safe for those 7 years, and Barack Obama has taken that safety away from us.
Dr. Carson.
Well, recognize that, President George W. Bush was a great friend of ours, and we spent many wonderful days at the White House. I haven't been there in the last 7 years. I'd probably have to have a food tester. But at any rate, I didn't suggest that nothing be done. What I suggested to President Bush is to be Kennedy-esque in the sense that when the Russians got ahead of us in the space race, what we did is use the bully pulpit to galvanize everybody, business, industry, academia, behind a national goal to put a man on the moon and bring him back safely. I said, you can do the same kind of thing. Declare that within 5 to 10 years we will become petroleum independent. The moderate Arab states would have been so concerned about that, they would have turned over Osama bin Laden and anybody else you wanted on a silver platter within 2 weeks. There are smart ways to do things, and there are muscular ways to do things, and sometimes you have to look at both of those to come up with the right solution.
Jake, I don't want to say this, Jake, is that while that may have been a fine idea that Dr. Carson had, these people were out to kill us. I stood in that region with my family, and every time a plane went overhead in the weeks after that, people's heads jerked to the sky because they thought it was happening again. You do not need to go through subtle diplomacy at that point. That can be handled later on. What you need is a strong American leader who will take the steps that are necessary to protect our nation. That's what I would do as commander-in-chief in this circumstance, and that's what President George W. Bush did in 2001.
Dr. Carson.
I have no argument with having a strong leader and to be aggressive where aggression is needed, but it's not needed in every circumstance. There is a time when you can use your intellect to come up with other ways to do things, and I think that's what we have to start thinking about. There is no question that a lot of these problems that we have been talking about in terms of the international situation is because we are weak. It's because our Navy is so small. It's because our Air Force is incapable of doing the same things that it did a few years ago. It's because our Marine Corps is not ready to be deployed. There are a lot of problems that are going on, and we need to solve those problems. We need to build up our military.
Radical terrorism cannot be solved by intellect. It cannot. They require, what they need is they need an operating space. That's what Afghanistan was for al-Qaeda. It was a vacuum that they filled, and they created an operating space. That's why they had to be drawn out of there. That's why they had to be destroyed. It is the reason why ISIS has now grown as well. We allowed a vacuum to emerge in Syria. They used it as an operating space to grow. And today, they're not just in Iraq and Syria anymore. They're now in Libya conducting operations in the Sinai. They're now in Afghanistan trying to supplant the Taliban as the most powerful radical jihadist group on the ground there as well. You cannot allow radical jihadists to have an operating safe haven anywhere in the world.
Governor Huckabee.
Just today, there was a new report that 50 different intelligence analysts have said that what they sent up the ladder was doctored by senior officials so that they could give some happy talk to the situation that we face. I love the idea of a good intellectual capacity to deal with our enemies, but the fact is, if you don't have good intelligence that's reliable and that's honest, you're not going to have good intelligence, and you cannot make good decisions. The next president is primarily elected not just to know things, but to know what to do with the things that he knows. And the most dangerous person in any room is the person who doesn't know what he doesn't know.
Thank you,
and
Governor.
The reason Barack Obama has been dangerous to this country, and we'd better elect someone who has had some executive experience, is because we cannot afford another 8 years having a person in the office who doesn't know what he does not know.
Thank you, Governor. I want to turn to ISIS. Governor Walker.
We just spent the last 10 minutes.
Governor Walker, there is a big debate right now. We've been talking about ISIS here and there about this in this discussion. There's a big debate right now about whether or not to send more U.S. troops to fight ISIS in Iraq and Syria. In the first debate earlier this evening, Senator Lindsey Graham argued that candidates are only serious about fighting ISIS if they are willing to send 10,000 U.S. troops to Iraq, 10,000 U.S. troops as part of a coalition to Syria. Governor Walker, you just told me a few days ago that the 3,000 U.S. troops there right now are enough as long as the rules of engagement are changed. What do you know that Senator Graham doesn't know?
No, to be clear, what I said the other day was that we need to lift the political restrictions that are already in play. Barack Obama's administration has put political restrictions on the military personnel already in Iraq. We need to lift those, and then we need to listen to our military experts, not the political forces in the White House, but our military experts about how many more we send in. And we certainly shouldn't have a commander-in-chief who sends a message to our adversaries as to how far we're going to go and how far we're willing to fight. So I'm not putting a troop number on. What I'm saying is lift the political restrictions. When you do that, you empower our military personnel already there to work with the Kurd and the Sunni allies to reclaim the territory taken by ISIS, and to do so in a way that allows that ISIS doesn't go back in Syria, as we were just talking about here. That is the fundamental problem going forward. We have a president, and Hillary Clinton, who was a part of this, by the way, who has made political decisions for our men and women in uniform. I want the men and women at home to know, if I am commander-in-chief, I will only send you into harm's way when our national security is at risk. And if we do, you know you'll have our full support, the support of the American people, and you'll have a clear path for victory.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Paul, I want to go to you because you have said that the boots on the ground to fight ISIS need to be Arab boots. We just learned today that despite the Obama administration spending $500 million to help create those Arab boots, there are only 4 or 5 U.S. trained fighters in Syria fighting ISIS. What does that say to you about the effectiveness of the idea of the boots on the ground need to be Arab boots?
If you want boots on the ground and you want them to be our sons and daughters, you got 14 other choices. There will always be a Bush or Clinton for you if you want to go back to war in Iraq. But the thing is, the first war was a mistake, and I'm not sending our sons and our daughters back to Iraq. The war didn't work. We can amplify those who live there. The Kurds deserve to be armed, and I'll arm them. We can use our Air Force to amplify the forces there, but the boots on the ground need to be the people who live there. My goodness, I'm still upset with the Saudi Arabians for everything they do over there. They've funded the arms that went to the jihadists. They're not accepting any of the people, any of the migrants that have been, the refugees that are being pushed out of Syria. Saudi Arabia is not accepting one. Why are we always the world's patsies that we have to go over there and fight their wars for them? They need to fight their wars. We need to defend American interests, but it's not in America's national security interest to have another war in Iraq.
We're going to turn to some domestic issues now. I want to bring in my colleague, Dana Bash.
Can I just make one point on this whole military discussion? I called for boots on the ground many months ago in a coalition with our friends who share our interests. You know, you win a battle with the military. And when we go somewhere, we need to be mobile and lethal. We need to take care of business, and we need to come home. But we face also a bigger war, and you win the bigger war with a battle of ideas. You wonder why young people and educated people, rich people, schooled people have tried to join ISIS. Western civilization, all of us need to wake up to the fact that those murderers and rapists need to be called out, and in Western civilization, we need to make it clear that our faith in the Jewish and Christian principles force us to live a life bigger than ourselves, to be sinners in justice, so that we can battle the radicals, call them out for what they are, and make sure that all of our people feel fulfilled in living in Western civilization. This is a giant battle in the world today.
Since everyone has gotten to weigh in on this military issue, I'd like to be able to do the same. We have spent probably 12 minutes talking about the past. Let's talk about the future. We need the strongest military on the face of the planet, and everyone has to know it. And specifically what that means is we need about 50 Army brigades, we need about 36 Marine battalions, we need somewhere between 300 and 350 naval ships, we need to upgrade every leg of the nuclear triad, we need to reform the Department of Defense, we need as well to invest in our military technology.
We're going to turn to domestic issues now
And
with
we
Dana
need to
Bash.
care for our veterans, so 307,000 of them
Bash.
aren't dying waiting for health care.
Thank you.